Today I want to talk about Dead by Daylight from a more broad picture perspective. Lately, there has been an epidemic of increasingly irritable people from both sides of the game, and in basically every case it is a fundamental misunderstanding of the goals of the role. There are some things that are terrible about the game presently, but they get straightforwardly ignored because there are so many people who would rather latch on to buzzwords and death threats than understand the game as if they're owed something, so let's talk bare basics. Dead by Daylight is a PvP game, where the goal of the survivor is to evade the killer, complete the generators, and open the exit gates. Killers try to prevent this from happening by using their superior speed and unique powers to kill the survivors. The game is designed in such a way the behavior wants the killer to hook survivors on a sort of 3 strikes system. In order to make sure that the strikes actually matter though, hooks have a limited amount of time, so if the survivor isn't saved before 70 seconds has elapsed, they get another strike. If they're on their second strike, or hook stage as we call it, or 70 seconds elapses again, they will die anyway. This means that another survivor has to come and unhook them and find a way to heal them safely, which bites into the time that survivors can otherwise spend repairing generators. If the survivors are being relatively efficient with their timing though, they can win the game fairly quickly as is in most scenarios. It's important to note that each generator takes 90 seconds to complete solo, and this means that if only one person gets chased at the start of the game and their chase takes 30 seconds or longer, then the other 30 survivors can complete 3 generators before the survivor on the hook reaches their second hook stage. Will this always be the case? Well, no, but it can be, depending on the relative strength of the killer's power and the size of the map that they're playing on. It also depends on whether the survivors know to split their generator pressure at the start of the game or not. At this point though, I'm getting a little too into the weeds, so let me take a step back and talk about it in a more numerical sense. Dead by Daylight is played on a 470 second timer, or just under 8 minutes. 5 generators at 90 seconds apiece and 20 seconds for one of the exit gates. The pace at which that timer goes down is determined by the survivors. The more that survivors spend working on their objective, the faster the timer goes. The killer is trying to stall or put more seconds on the timer as efficiently as they can. Chasing one survivor and hooking them, while it definitely slows the timer down, doesn't have nearly as much of an effect as chasing multiple survivors or killing one survivor as quickly as possible. And if the first survivor leads a chase that's 30 seconds long, that's 30 seconds that the other 3 survivors individually get to work on generators, stacking up to a total 90-second chunk out of the total 470-second timer. This is the primary reason why killers bring generator regression perks, because as soon as they knock a survivor down and win the chase, the reward is a few seconds refund on the match timer. Scourge Hook Pain Resonance, the unequivocal best regression perk in the game, targets the generator with the highest progress, taking a whopping 18 seconds off of it. In total, Pain Res refunds 72 seconds of the 470 that a match can run for, if the killer even gets 4 separate hooks in a game, and if their Pain Res hooks are in favorable locations. Alternatively, tunneling a survivor out of the game as quickly as possible reduces the team speed from 3x efficiency to 2x efficiency, since one survivor dead and one survivor being chased afterwards lets only 2 more survivors work on generators. 90 seconds becomes 60. If the killer wants to win their games with more regularity because they are doing their job of sabotaging the game timer, they will opt to kill one of the survivors as early as possible. Do they need to? Not always, because punishing mistakes as killer is much less linear than I'm making it out to be. But I include this linear example because it is the easiest way for me to highlight exactly how the game works fundamentally, and then from here we can build up the rest of the video. What is linear though is what pre-nerf Fast Track did to this game. The killer chases a survivor at the start of the game for 30 seconds, 90 seconds of generators get done. Once the killer hooks that survivor that they spent time chasing, every survivor that brought Fast Track would permanently reduce the total timer of the game by 6 seconds. 470 becomes 464. Hook 2 more and it's 452 seconds, all while those generators keep getting completed. It might seem inconsequential as a standalone effect, and it is in this extremely isolated example that I've drawn up for simplicity's sake, but you have to consider that the 30 seconds that then gets spread out to 90 seconds suddenly becomes 96 seconds permanently for every single time that a different survivor gets hooked. This also doesn't consider that once the 90 seconds for a generator is completed, there is no way of regressing that ever again. Your timer will become shorter as the time of the game goes on. Now, this doesn't add in other perks, the time that the players on either side spend on tasks intermittently, or again, the relative strength of the killer in either their power or their player, all of which I'll try to get around to explaining how it contributes to the messiness of DBD. But taking a step back and looking at the big picture, if I were completely brand new to the game and I was told that there was a way where the killer could slow down the game by a third and force out more consistent wins, I would be taking that method in a heartbeat. See, what a lot of you don't understand about Dead by Daylight is that it is a PvP game. The goal of any PvP game is to maintain a victory over your opponents, and the problem that DBD faces is that it sits in a unique position where its player base is split between two very distinct roles of an aggressor and a victim. You don't get to say that I'm a defender main in Rainbow Six and get mad at attacker mains for trying to plant the diffuser and holding pixel angles on you. It's because they're trying to win, and because you can do that right back when you have the chance yourself. So when a Dead by Daylight player crosses their arms and insults somebody because they're trying to win the game, it communicates a complete lack of understanding of how the game functions from a very basic, foundational, mathematic perspective. Of course, the survivors are gen rushing. What else are they gonna do? Wait for somebody's permission to touch the generators? Of course, the killer killed that survivor at 5 hooks. What were they gonna do? Wait for somebody's permission to kill an easy target that landed right in front of them? I feel like I'm going insane because the vast majority of players are not getting gen rushed or tunneled out of the game. Sure, you might lose a few generators fairly quickly, or you might be the first person to die in a game, but that does not mean that you're going to be getting the toughest experience in every game. When multiple gens pop at the start of the game, it probably just means that you had a bad first chase, and that is just how the game goes sometimes. And quite often, most players are predisposed to negative biases, and the biases in this game are more or less tied to how the other side has made personal experiences less fun and engaging. It is so ridiculously unfun to play a low-tier killer like Trapper or Ghostface these days, because your chases take forever and the generators are completed at the same rate as any other killer. Playing solo queue Survivor also feels terrible because while you're desperately trying to get generators done, your teammates are not at all clued into the myriad of decisions that need to be made in order to keep everyone alive for as long as possible. You are not getting gen rushed every game, and you're not getting tunneled every game. As a killer player, it's more likely that you're getting into long chases and basically hemorrhaging that time away. As a survivor, it's more likely that you're making a series of poor decisions that lead to your early demise. For instance, when a survivor is unhooked, they gain 15 seconds of endurance and 10% haste. It used to be 10 seconds, now it's 15. That is, for 15 seconds when they are unhooked, they move at 4.4 meters per second instead of the usual 4.0, and are allowed to tank an instance of damage for free. The idea behind this change was to discourage the highly uninteractive strategy that killers could employ, where they would be able to instantly down an unhooked survivor unless the rescuer was running a very specific perk. I fully agree with this change by design because PvP games generally shouldn't give any one player the opportunity to take complete agency away from one player. And when you are running at 4.4 meters per second for 15 seconds, that means that you can clear 66 meters of distance while being effectively invulnerable. That's a lot of distance for the killer to cover too, because now in order to find you after you've been unhooked, they have to guess what direction you ran in. If you use that to run to a corner where fewer generators are being completed, the killer has to make a decision between chasing you off hook again, 66 or more meters away, or starting a fresh chase with somebody else. But for some reason, so many survivors choose to burn that 15 seconds of free distance by getting healed under the hook, which makes the game so much easier on the killer. Even if you get healed under the hook, that gives the killer the indication that there are 2 people at the hook and potentially 2 people to chase at the same time. Survivors that heal under hook are giving the killer the 2x efficiency multiplier before one of the survivors even perishes. But then the problem with the 15 seconds of endurance is that people often use it as an aggressive body blocking tool. Often to the unhooked survivor's detriment, as it gives away their invulnerable state when they could have been wasting time taking a chase to the other side of the map, getting healed a little later on, and working on generators. When somebody chooses to body block me like this, of course I'm going to chase them immediately afterwards because they're injured, no longer invulnerable, in an extremely obvious location and potentially one hook away from being removed from the game entirely. It is insane to me that with consistency, the people who try to body block with their extremely powerful defensive effect often complain the loudest about being tunneled out of the game. Like, you have a prime opportunity to guarantee that your chase lasts for 15 seconds at a minimum, and that's how you use it? I cannot comprehend how minuscule this community's critical thinking skills are sometimes. Split up. Use the width of the map. Botany knowledge is an exceedingly common perk, so when your teammates do find you, then it's likely that you'll get healed quickly anyway, and you'll have made cross-map distance. How do we not understand this? That isn't to say that there won't be killers who burn through endurance and stop at nothing to cut you down, but I can guarantee with 100% certainty that this doesn't happen every game. At a certain point, there has to be some responsibility that one takes for their actions. Right, okay, so let's go back to that magic number of 470 seconds and just snap it into pieces, because games of DBD are not really that linear thanks to perks. The strongest perks for killers are the ones that either refund part of that 470 second timer, or ones that lessen the time spent chasing and finding survivors, since it gives the rest of the survivors less time to work on generators. As it turns out, sniping somebody across the map with a hillbilly or a blight with lethal pursuer gives survivors significantly less time to work on generators. Bamboozle's ability to lock down loops makes it so that survivors go down faster, so they buy their team less time in the chase. The strongest perks for survivors are the ones that extend chase timers or increase generator speeds, and there are several different perks that give survivors access to either one of these. If I were to say that a healthy person is expected to go down in an average of 30 seconds, assuming 15 seconds for each health state, then perks like Dead Hard and Decisive Strike tack on an extra 15 seconds that that person wouldn't have had access to otherwise. Exhaustion perks like Sprint Burst and Lithe buy the survivor another 10 or so seconds every time their cooldown resets. Healing perks like Botany Knowledge or Do No Harm make it so that survivors can quickly restore 15 seconds worth of chase time for each player they heal. Generator speed perks like Hyperfocus and Stakeout effectively double the speed at which generators get completed, making chases even more effective as they bite into more time. That doesn't include other powerful perks like Unbreakable, Shoulder the Burden, Resurgence, Babysitter, Self-Preservation, Overcome, We're Gonna Live Forever, or revealing perks that relay information on the killer's location so that you can best position yourself away from them. There are so many tools at the survivor's disposal that all contribute to their ability to delay the game in many magnitudes greater than what killer perks have to offer. The reason why this is the case is because survivors don't have powers like killers do, so they need perk options to compensate for it. If killers have a wide variety of perk options available to them, it can often lead to situations where the perks aren't supplementing the power and are instead replacing the necessity for the power in general. The Unemployed Hen's Hex build on Henry has been the build that I've faced the most as a survivor, and in those cases I don't feel like I'm losing to Henry, but rather the fact that his perks are more of a nuisance than learning to dodge the power. Survivors, on the other hand, have become so over-reliant on perks that they'll make blatant mistakes and use their perks as a method of covering it up, usually to great effect because most of the killers in this game are not capable of overcoming somebody leaving a generator last second with Sprint Burst, for instance. This should be a mistake in terms of overall positioning and awareness, but whoops, the survivor gets away for free because they brought the strong perk. And they'll gloat about it too, while choosing to cry when the killer takes a measly 18 seconds out of the generator they've been working on with a perk that so many killers see as a baseline requirement nowadays. The 10 or so extra seconds that Sprint Burst buys the survivor in chase is multiplied out across the rest of their team, so even if the killer breaks that one generator, they still bought a minimum of a combined 30 seconds of time for the rest of their team afterwards. Thing is, there will be several people in the comments or on Twitter who will fold their arms and say that their survivor teammates aren't doing anything, and so none of these issues are as strong as I claim they are. So in that case, you agree with me that a lot of people are terrible at Dead by Daylight because it's much easier for the killer to punish mistakes in an inexperienced and uncoordinated environment. If more of the player base actually took the time to learn the basic macro and counterplay to the killers they face, kill rates would plummet across the board. At the end of March, we got official stats from Behavior that showcase the top killer kill rates versus pick rates for both high and broad MMR ratings. In broad MMR, which most people are in, the highest kill rate killers were the Lich, the Nightmare, the Onryo, the Dredge, and the Cenobite. The most popular killer by pick rate out of these 5, according to Nightlight, was the Lich, riding just below the 2% mark at spot number 23 out of 42. So the reason why people are dying to these killers more often in broad MMR counts is because they don't know what they do or what the proper counterplay is. It's the inexperience that kills them, yet players will point to these kill rates and say, see, killers are being babysat, without understanding the context behind the stats. Now, I've seen an evergreen claim floating around that Behavior has been targeting a 60% kill rate for their killer cast, but the fact that the Cenobite is in the top 5 in broad MMR with a kill rate that barely passes that benchmark really goes to show that most of the roster is floundering beneath that 60%.
60% of course meaning that on average 2.4 survivors die per game, and most of the cast is beneath that number. But the Trickster rework behavior also showcased some stats for that killer specifically, revealing that he had a 54.6% kill rate, placing him a decent number of percentage points lower than the 60% goal. And I'd like to once again point out that many of these kills are likely related to how people don't know the counterplay or how to play the macro game correctly. If they learn better, this will go down. Nightlight, on the other hand, is a website whose stats are likely maintained by a rather narrow high MMR English-speaking PC-only subsect of players, and in their stats from nearly 11,000 games in the past month, the Lich is still the highest kill rate killer at 56% in total. The lowest, in case you're curious, is Chucky at 39. When players understand what game they're playing, killers absolutely suffer across the board. The common argument against this is that not everyone is high MMR, but anyone who wants to get better at the game will look to high MMR players to learn from. In a similar tone, I've heard the argument that, oh, DBD is a party game, so it shouldn't be this sweaty, at which point I can't take you seriously. Dead by Daylight has not been a party game for the last 8 years, because when live service games evolve over time, they gradually reach a point where all that's left to do is play it in an optimal competitive way. And maybe your initial low MMR experiences led you to believe that this game would be a nice casual experience all the way through, but that's not at all the reality of this title in 2026. And may I also say one more time for the record that this is a PvP game. People want to win the games they play. As you run into more practiced and experienced players, they will get meaner and harder to face because they've learned more tricks as their experience of the game has grown. Trying to tailor the title to an idyllic viewpoint and getting mad when things don't go your way is exceptionally entitled and childish. I get that there are frustrating elements to Dead by Daylight and that the game's wide swaths of customization can lead people to believe that this game has more fluidity to it. But to be honest with you, it kinda doesn't fundamentally. So no matter what way you cut it, there will still be 470 seconds of objectives to complete and a killer in the way to put an end to it all. There is fluidity in the moment-to-moment decisions both sides get to make based on the game state and what killer is being played. Let's take our baseline example from earlier. 30-second chase, 60 seconds spent on the hook, 3 gens get done. In this scenario, if I'm playing killer, all the pressure that I have on survivors is entirely centered around the person that I have on hook. If I want to win or push an advantage, I have to hope that I can use the hooked survivor as bait and that the generators that I have remaining are near me. If I'm playing survivor and I notice that the killer is proxy camping, I'll gladly try and take their attention as if I'm going for the unhook. If they don't take the bait, I'll even aggressively trade the hook because then the killer just has to deal with 15 seconds of endurance and haste on the person that I have just unhooked. In another common scenario, I might have knocked down a survivor as a killer, but I know that somebody is hovering nearby to stun me with a pallet or a flashlight. Since the second survivor is determined to get this saved, the best way to punish their positioning is by chasing them off, because a survivor going for a flashlight save is a survivor that isn't working on the objective. If I manage to successfully chase this person down as well, then that requires a third person to get involved to go and heal the person I've left on the ground, meaning that only one player is working on generators now. That's called adapting to the game, which is what makes DBD actually fun and engaging, making those little micro adjustments and adaptations. The possibility of losing off of a bad macro call, the possibility of winning off of a sneaky microplay, all these keep the game invigorating and balanced on a razor's edge. But when that razor's edge is dulled by a lazy over-reliance on a select handful of perks and oversaturated base kit mechanics, the alacrity that defines an exhilarating game of Dead by Daylight is all but lost. All that remains then are fundamental, reductive playstyles that only seek to beat the clock. And this is why slugging has remained an undefeated strategy for killers now, because it prevents survivors from getting value from the majority of their strong perks. They can't activate Deliverance if nobody's ever been hooked, Dead Hard isn't a problem if someone has never been hooked, and so on and so on. Behavior clearly didn't design the game to be played in this way though, given how the sacrificial meat hooks work, and given how they tried to stamp out slugging in September of last year. So when hook timers last 70 seconds up from the previous 60, and when survivors get their strongest perks activated alongside 15 seconds of invulnerability when unhooked, which a lot of them use to aggressively defend their teammates, realistically what other options do the killers have? If they can't find somebody else, they're going to go back to the hook because that's where two survivors are, and that's where two survivors can often be found healing right away because you're healing under hook, and the killer can chase two people at once, and that's inefficient. I don't understand how nobody seems to be getting this. Yet this coerced, boring playstyle is frowned upon because God forbid you try to use the information you have in a PvP game to punish bad macro plays to win it. And if you haven't already realized, though, at this point, this video is more of an outlet for me to talk about why I've been frustrated and burnt out on DBD and why I prefer to other games in the meantime. I'm sorry for posting my opinions to my channel, it will happen again. But beyond Deathslinger's bugs and beyond everything that I've complained about so far, though, my biggest frustration has been the palette density changes. Here's an image from Fresh Perspective showing off 8 combined windows and palettes, including and leading up to Shack on one of the Macmillan maps. Nice. I've noticed this especially on the Crotus Pen Asylum maps, where a filler palette will lead into one of those half-wall Crotus Pen fillers, which then leads into a guaranteed tile, and then again into a jungle gym from the base game. The issue with palette density is that it only serves to coddle the people who aren't good at the game by giving them so many time-wasting opportunities. Ordinarily, the understanding is that you can run a loop 3 times before you have to drop the palette if you're hugging it tight enough. Maybe more if you can greed the loop and juke the killer out. But knowing how and when to time a pallet drop comes with experience and a little bit of luck depending on whom you're playing against for the day. But now with the pallet density update, you don't need to conserve or learn how to loop pallets because you'll waste the same amount of time by dropping them and running a few meters away to the next available one. As someone who wants to get better at Survivor, I feel like I'm getting carried by how easy this feels. As a Deathslinger player, it is so incredibly boring to wait for pallet drop animations and just shoot people over it. And with so many obstacles in the way now, I can't go for open shots quite as often because I will lose distance very, very easily. Also, the pallet density change made it so that the Macmillan fillers are impossible for Deathslinger now. When the filler rocks were wider, there was a gap between the rock and the tree that you could shoot through to catch survivors as they were clearing the corner, but now the rock and the tree have fused, leaving the pallet as the only angle to shoot over. How boring. Xantastic here summarizes my thoughts pretty well, that survivors don't realize how powerful they are because they refuse to learn basic macro or counterplay. And I see it as a cult of this main character syndrome that's popped up on the internet recently, but on both sides, where everything has to go exactly right in the exact same way in every single game. If it doesn't because of some change in the system, then that's the opposition's fault. Please, in order to get better at this game, just learn to count. And understand that this game is not as casual as a lot of people like to pretend it is. That's really all that I have to complain about for this video. My job search has been going terribly, so I wrote this script for my own entertainment's sake while I'm just waiting on calls, I guess, at this point. Anyway, take care. Bye.